Thank you, Dennis. I'm not sure that I'm qualified to tell y'all that I know much about anything to do with wind turbines or solar panels. I will tell you I've been in this business a long time. I graduated from Texas A&M in 1970. I went to work in the appraisal business 2 weeks before I graduated from college. My family, my great-grandparents, moved here in 1900 with 6 kids. I couldn't wait to get out of East Texas so I could come back to Eldorado. I could have made more money in one of the bigger cities or whatever in the appraisal business. As it turned out, all I did was come back to where I wanted to live to start with. And I have been here trying to do the exact same thing all of this time, simply because I wanted to help rural Texas. When I was still in Bryan working, we had a little family that had 800 acres out west of Bryan. They were killed in a car wreck, and when we went out and did the appraisal, it turned out that, and I think at that time that the exemption was $120,000 per person. They had to, their heirs had to sell that farm to pay the federal estate tax. I said at that point, that was probably 72 or something like that, I said, if I can, I'm going to try as best I can to help people hold on to their land as long as they want to hold on to it. And that's kind of why I moved back to Eldorado and why I've done what I've done. Don't get me wrong, I've made a good living here. I've raised my kids here. I've enjoyed everything out here. But I did it because I wanted to, I guess, try to help a few folks hold on to their ranches and their farms. Let me firstly say, whatever I'm going to tell you today is my opinion. This is Phil McCormick speaking. I'm not representing anybody else. I'm not telling you that I have all the answers. I'm telling you that in 54 years of being in the appraisal business, these are the conclusions and the opinions that I've come up with. When I grew up in Eldorado, small kid, I can't tell you what grade he was in. Some of y'all might remember, might not. I'm gonna say 6th grade or something like that. They told, they made a statement, and I think it was in geography. I wasn't noted for being, I was smart enough, I just wasn't noted for applying myself much in school. And so I can't tell you, but I think it was geography. One of the things that I remember hearing, we have 7 regions in Texas that are all unique and different than what anybody else has. And those include, you know, as y'all know as well as I do, the Big Bend, the Panhandle, South Texas, the Gulf Coast, the Piney Woods, Hill Country, the Prairie region. And I remember that. I didn't go look it up. I remember that from some 70 years ago when I heard that, because Texas is unique, was unique. Now I drive across Texas and I drive 40 to 50,000 miles a year appraising ranches. primarily South Texas, West Texas, and some up in the Panhandle. I drive all the way across Texas, and the one unique characteristic that I see that just turns my stomach is everywhere I go, I see wind turbines. It's not something that I'm proud of. It's not something I'm proud of that we have any in Schleicher County. When we had some come in up here in the north end of the county, I don't know how long ago that's going to be, 6 or 8 years ago or maybe longer. I went down to the school board because on their agenda they were asking for a tax abatement for these wind turbines. And I went down to the school board and I explained all of the things that I thought was wrong with the whole system. At that particular time, I remember well, wind turbines were costing $1.5 million a piece. The federal government was paying for about 2/3 of it, which meant y'all were paying for 2/3 of it. And then we were going to give them a tax abatement. Something about me and growing up in this very conservative area is that if I'm going to pay taxes, I want everybody else to pay taxes. I don't understand why we give people a tax abatement. They didn't put people to work. They didn't stimulate the economy. They didn't do anything. In Schleicher County, in the last, 10 or 15 years, we've had wind turbines come in. We've had a 42-inch gas pipeline. We've had 2 different 345 kV power lines come in. My taxes haven't gone down $1. And we've got all those people supposedly paying taxes. All right, let's move on. Land ownership is primarily based on, or what we hope it's based on, is a fee simple estate. Fee simple estate is defined as the absolute ownership unencumbered by any other interest. It's subject only to the limitations imposed by the government. These are taxation, eminent domain, police power, and escheat. The rest of that we control. Encumbrances, we're going to have encumbrances on that land. We've chosen most of these. Let me just give you an example. A hunting lease is an encumbrance on a tract of land. A grazing lease is, a farming lease, an oil and gas lease. All of these are encumbrances, and they take away from or they infringe upon your rights of ownership. Most of these we make by our choice. They're not imposed upon us. We kind of buy into it. People ask me all the time, said, how come you're still working? And I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm still working because I don't want to put up with deer hunters. That's a personal philosophy and nothing else. But I'd rather work than worry about my gates being left open, or worry about my stock getting mixed up, or worry about whatever it is. Them running over a fence and not fixing it, whatever it might be. Another thing that encumbers or infringes upon our land ownership, obviously death is one of them. IRS taxes are something that we're going to have to deal with, that we've had to deal with. If you've owned your land for 50 years, that's been a consideration that's come up. As a generation passes, we have to fight that battle. Depression was certainly something that affected the old-timey ranchers. Drought is affecting every one of us. I assume that it is. It's certainly changed my outlook on wanting to be a rancher several times. In my appraisals, I consider things that affect those ranches, things that are out there, things that have been done. Power lines, pipelines, wind farms would be one of them. Those things are a detriment, they take away from the rights and the ownership and the enjoyment of land that we all have. I make adjustments for those factors when I do an appraisal. And what I try to do is measure what the market is telling me. I don't make up those numbers. I mean, a lot of people think I do, but I really don't. I try to measure them from what I see in the sales and this kind of thing. And I think that many of these things that affect that land and affect that ownership and affects that value of that property, we don't have any choice over. They condemn you for a pipeline or a power line or something, and you don't have any choice. Wind turbines, you have a choice. You are your own destiny there, and if you want to make a deal with the wind turbines, then you're going to suffer the consequences that go along with that. And I simply think that my opinion is that it's a detriment, it's an impact that's going to affect us for a long time. The typical wind farm lease, as I'm told, and I had a meeting with Apex a couple of weeks ago, and at that time I invited them to come to this meeting when I knew it was going to be here. And I kind of went through some of their typical stuff. Their typical deal is they want to do, now they go through this evaluation period that they have right now where they're going to lease your land for $6 an acre and put up their little, whatever they call those things that measure what the wind is, see if you've got adequate wind and that stuff. Then as you get closer and they think it's more imminent, they're going to pay you maybe $10. But basically, their lease is a 30-year lease, and then they want 2 10-year options on top of that. I make my living juggling numbers, but it's not hard for anybody to figure that out. That's 50 years, folks. I see some folks out here that can identify with 50 years. And I'm just going to tell you, 50 years is a long, long time. When I was a kid, we didn't have air conditioning. You know, if there was a little breeze came through that window at night, and you got a little breeze, well, boy, that was a blessing. But we didn't have air conditioning, and that's one of the greatest inventions I've come to recognize in my later years. Actually, it's been most of my life. I like air conditioning. Let me say that all of this deal with the wind farm is one-sided. Once you sign on with their evaluation period and their options and their lease and everything, you've given up your control on what they do. So for 50 years, that wind farm is going to do what they want to do. It's a long time. I've been around long enough. I can tell you a little bit about 50 years. Let me just tell you, when I moved back from Bryan College Station, I trotted over to the bank. My daddy was in there. He never offered to co-sign a note for me or anything. Those of you that knew Hollis McCormick might have known that wasn't in his little agenda that he was going to do that, but he was in the bank. And so I went in there and I told that president of the bank that I wanted to buy a new pickup. $5,500, I bought a brand new Ford Super Cab 3/4 ton pickup with a 390 motor and a 4-speed transmission. You couldn't buy anything better in 1975. You might have thought you could have based on what you're looking at now, but those same pickups, the high-end vehicles that you're out there buying today, they're $60,000, $80,000, you know? I'm just going to tell you, you can't go buy something for for 10 times what it was back then. When I moved back here, one of the first jobs that I had, I was lucky enough to get hired to appraise the Harrison Ranch down there on the Sutton and Edwards County line. I ran sales in, 43,000 acres. You know, I'm working for myself at that point. I was like, how in the heck am I going to appraise that thing? I knew what I needed to do. I just didn't know whether I was going to be able to get it done or not. I ran sales in every county around, Slacker, Sutton, Crockett, Menard, every place I could find. I talked to everybody that knew anything about real estate, whatever, trying to gather sales. Pretty much, I'm just going to tell you, and this is no joke, I've still got the sales, I can prove it. $125 an acre was pretty much of a representative price 50 years ago. Today, it's $1,500, maybe $2,000. So there has been a large increase in land values, but it's been over 50 years. But that has been what in an area or whatever I call wealth accumulation. Most of these big ranching families that we think are well-to-do these days got well-to-do because of ownership of land and the fact that it went up and there's more demand for it now and that kind of thing. 50 years is a long time. And what I want to ask you is, what kind of a legacy are you going to leave for your kids, your grandkids, whatever? I'm just going to tell you that there are several things that will affect that legacy that we don't have control over, so we need to control the things that we can. I'm opposed to wind farms. The primary reason, and you can Google this, you can look at it on any computer, whatever, the primary reasons that they show are aesthetics and noise. About 25 years ago, we had a lawsuit in Taylor County up in Abilene. Those of you that ever go to Abilene, if you'll notice when you go through that Coronados camp area, there's a lot of wind turbines and stuff there. a lot of the wealthy people had moved out there and built really nice homes. And then they woke up one day and there was a wind turbine up on a hill overlooking their house. And so they had kind of a class action lawsuit against those people. And we went through and covered lots of areas. But the main thing that they ended up saying in that lawsuit, the one factor that they made the jury decide whether there was damage or not was on noise. Don't ask me why. I mean, I think if it's right on your property line or right close to your house, yeah, they make noise and you're going to hear it. But I think the aesthetics, the view, what they've done to the scenery is the worst thing that's happened. Another thing is loss of control. You can sign that lease. You can have your lawyer read that lease. You can do everything you want to with that lease. But let me tell you, you do not know how the courts are going to interpret what that lease says if you get in a lawsuit or get in a fight with them 30 or 40 years from now. We've seen that over and over and over. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time in court, and I'm shocked every time I go because what was common sense and what was written down no longer makes sense anymore. Let me throw out another thing that nobody ever talks about, but as ranchers, you need to be thinking about. I had when I was moved back here and was starting out in the appraisal business, I actually had an office in Eldorado in '74, but I opened an office in San Angelo in '76, and we had an appraisal meeting up there in San Angelo. They said, hey, you know, we got that McCormick kid up there, let's make him put on a program and blah, 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 and all that. He's out there, you know, where they got ranches. And this was the Texas chapter of the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. And so I went to gathering up speakers and who I could find. One of the guys that I gathered up was that I just went and asked him to if he would come and speak to us was John Cargile. Y'all know John Cargile because he's the guy that had Producers Livestock Auction, and that's who we sell most of our livestock to all of these years. He made a speech not on marketing livestock, whether it be cattle, sheep, goats, or whatever, but he made a speech on ranch management. And he said the biggest challenge that we face is maintenance of these ranches. We're going to spend all of our time spraying pear, spraying mesquite or grubbing mesquite, building fence, and all of this kind of thing. I was disappointed because that wasn't really what I had thought that I was engaging John Cargile to talk about. But as the last 50 years have gone by since that took place, I've come to realize that he knew a whole lot more and he had a bigger vision than I did. Because I've sprayed pear on the same place 3 times. Mesquite, I'm not sure we didn't pour fertilizer on it, you know. My point about the whole thing is that these are things. When you put wind turbines out there, do you think an airplane is going to fly around wind turbines with those blades turning and spray mesquite and spray pear? I don't know, but I think it's going to be a problem. Another thing that brings that to point is up in the Sweetwater, Snyder area, there's a lot of wind turbines up there, and they were there before we were down in our area. That Roby country has a lot of good farmland, and they've got wind turbines everywhere. And as those farmers evolved to where they were using 8-row or 10-row or 12-row equipment, all of a sudden they've had to gone back to using 4-row equipment because the wind turbines don't allow you to have all those long runs that you used to have, and those point roads show up more often. And I just think that's one of the things that maybe we don't always consider. Let me just summarize part of what my life has been like in the last 50 years. In the 1970s, when I went out and appraised a ranch, I looked at the grass. I looked at what kind of condition it was in, what kind of grasses was there, that kind of thing. I looked at the water distribution system, you know, how far did livestock have to travel to get water, that kind of a thing. I looked at the pens, whether or not the property had bitter weed was a big consideration. Do you know that I'm going to challenge landowners? There's not 25% even know what bitter weed looks like if they were standing in the middle of it. And that was a big thing in the 70s. In the 90s and maybe up to 200, then we had some things start changing. Minerals became more important, no matter whether you had production or not, just the leasing of them and that kind of thing. Deer hunting became important. The potential for subdivisions became important. I think that those things took away from the production end of agriculture, from what the ranch would produce and all those. Now, today, let me tell you what the buyers are wanting. No pipelines, no power lines, no wind turbines. They want their little piece of real estate where they control what happens and they can do what they want to on there. And these folks have money. You know, it's not poor boys out there buying that stuff anymore. These people have money. Lots of heirs today, sadly, but lots of heirs today, they don't want a ranch. They want to live in the city. They like the conveniences, whatever they may be. You know, they're a hazard to me. All that traffic, it doesn't do much for me. So what happens to these ranches when this comes up is they basically got two options. They can sell it or they can partition it. And my thinking is that wind farms are going to affect the ability of these people to make these decisions, whether they sell it or whether they partition it. I partitioned a ranch over at Eden not too long ago, and 2 pieces, and I ended up giving one part of it 3 or 4 wind turbines, and the other side got no wind turbines. I've agonized over that because it wasn't fair, and I'm not sure I compensated adequately for what. The one that had the wind turbines had the best country. It had the live oak on it and all that. So it was more valuable land before it started. But when it got through with it, it wasn't any more valuable than that old mesquite country was. I guess that what I want to say, what will 50 years from now bring? Y'all look at all of the changes that have taken place. I don't care whether it's putting people on the moon. I don't care whether it's computers. I don't care what it is that's taken place in the last 50 years. What's going to happen in 2075? If you enter into an agreement or a wind farm lease and you're tied up for 50 years, you don't have a clue what's going to happen in that length of time. They talk about they're going to reclaim that land at the end of that, the reclamation process, the restoration process. Oh, we'll put up a bond to cover all that. Put up a bond to cover the restoration that's going to take place in 50 years? How in the world do you know what that's going to cost? How can you allow for all of that? You know, we're going to have all these wind farms have roads all over them. They've got lines ditched. They've got whatever. Apex told me that they've got 400 to 800 yards, depending on the soil, 400 to 800 yards of concrete underneath every wind turbine. We call that green energy. I have to wonder about it. Let me throw something out to you real quick. You know what these wind turbine blades, we see them going up and down the road everywhere. You know, I get behind them and I stomp my feet and talk to myself a little bit and that kind of thing, because they don't go fast enough and they got these people leading them around and they won't let you pass and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, typically these blades that are on these wind turbines last 10, 12 years, something in that neighborhood. You know, I don't spend a lot of time chasing this stuff down because I actually do still work a little. Anyway, they have been taking these blades and cutting them into thirds. And they've been loading them up on trucks and hauling them up to Wyoming and digging a big hole and burying those things. And we call that green energy? I got to question it. I don't like burying all the stuff we bury in the ground anyway. The most recent deal that I've heard of is they're chipping those blades up and they're hauling them to Nebraska and burying them there. Anyway, that's certainly a consideration that I think you ought to make, because Texas has a lot of land, and I can promise you they'll be burying them out here before long if they're not already. One other thing I want to bring up is we don't have control over this stuff, and you can find as many different opinions as you can find people, but these wind turbines, primarily wind farms, and I think the solar farms also, cause an interference with some people's TVs, radios, microwaves, this kind of thing. The companies tell you no, but if you're one of those people that it does affect, then what choice are you going to have? You're going to get up and move, I guess. All right, let me close up and say my experience, and I've done some studies. Most of the data that I got came from up in that Snyder, Sweetwater, south end of Taylor County, in that area, because I had sales, I had ranches I was working on up there. It looks to me like, my best guess, you're going to lose 20 to 30% of your value of your real estate if you've got wind turbines on it. Everybody says, well, what am I going to do if they're next door? What if they're on the neighbor? Well, you know, I think you're going to be affected. There's no question. I'm not going to tell you any different. I think you're going to be affected. But you may be the exception to the rule if the time comes that you have to divest yourself. Then you may not be impacted, certainly to the same degree. So I'm going to close by saying, what do you think the next 50 years is going to bring for you? Are you willing to give up control for the next 50 years? That's all I've got. I'll entertain questions, but